It is with my absolute joy to be inviting Jeff to the podcast. And it's a very interesting way that I discovered you online because over the last couple years, I have done so much mediumship with families of individuals that have suffered from what I see is brain trauma, also known as TBI. And it led me into this rabbit hole of wanting to understand why there isn't better support or even a better pathway of diagnosis when it comes to traumatic brain injury. And that is how I discovered you on your podcast and went to your website, saw your book, and I'd love for you to take a moment and just thoroughly introduce yourself.
Absolutely. First off, for you and for the listener, it's an honor to be here speaking with you. It's an honor to be anywhere these days. Part of my story, and obviously this is in the book, and I'll jump around a little bit because otherwise it would be too long of an answer. But when I was 13, I was struck in the lower mandible with a door that had not been on the hinges. I think I'd been laying on the floor. I was just a kid, and I kind of heard the whoosh as it swung down, and it really hit me pretty good. It rearranged the shape of my top mandible. It kind of folded it. It took about a half a lip off at the time, and there was a bit of plastic surgery, immediate like surgical orthodontist to kind of create realignment. A number of teeth had come out. It was a messy accident, as brain injuries often do and are.
Mm.
And I was put into a CT scan, and the only criteria at that time would have been, is your skull cracked? Which, keep in mind, a skull is pretty thick bone. It's incredibly hard to crack. Or they were looking for a blotch on the scan if you had a vascular injury in your brain, i.e., a stroke. That was seemingly their criteria. And anything short of that wasn't even really considered a concussion. And so, interestingly enough, I don't necessarily remember experience concussion in the sense that like you would in a sports related injury, one pupil dilates, super sensitive to light, nausea, those things. But what I would say happened, and there was a bit of a delay in it that made it hard for me or anybody else to figure out. There was a radical shift in my personality in what would soon lead to a lifetime that was punctuated by events that were systemic of an undiagnosed brain injury, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so I think it's also really powerful because where you are today, you are helping individuals understand these shifts that happen from injury. And you also provide very specific ways to accelerate, I mean, a better pathway of living. Unfortunately, a lot of the families that I connect to are connected to individuals that unfortunately go through the personality shift after the injury. And then it can take sometimes years where there is some kind of shift, again, in the thinking that leads them to unalive themselves. Now, there are other pathways that have occurred for many of the individuals I've worked with, which is addiction. Some actually some of the people, some of the families I've worked with also spoke into how addiction was something that played in with the process that eventually led them to connecting with me. And what I've seen time and time again is that there hasn't been an accurate way by Western medicine to truly diagnose or offer support to individuals that are suffering from anything as minor as a concussion to something as traumatic as, let's say, a car accident or something that seems much more obvious to us, if that makes sense. I was listening to your podcast when you spoke about the number of addiction facilities in America and how at the time of the recording of that podcast, which is in 2024, that there were perhaps 250,000 people that were checked into addiction facilities. Is that correct?
So the number of patients, that was a best guess.
Sure.
But where I came up with that number, there's the data I checked, and again, this would be 23 or 24. There may be some new ones, and some may have folded, but there was 6,196 residential treatment centers. Now, some of those are very concierge and have six patients. Some of those are very huge and have 180. So I kind of came up with the number of 40 and then just multiplied. Yeah, there's about 250,000 patients in residential treatment for substance abuse. And out of those, we'll just call it 6,200 treatment centers. How many of them are actually using a diagnostic tool? Well, okay, actually forget about the diagnostic tool for a second. How many of them are even asking the question, have you fallen off a ladder? Did you ever fall by the pool and hit your head?
Yeah.
Because if they were asking a question as simple as that, they would find out that roughly 50% of their intakes had had a cerebral incident. And if you probed further, you would find out that a lot of those people were symptomatic from that event, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I find that absolutely fascinating because I don't see that there is a lot of support even online with being able to identify other people that suffer from similar incidents. Very specifically, I don't what I've seen as the intuitive is that, concussions are often just sort of brushed off and, as self-correcting within, like, a month. Is that correct? I just feel like that's the very obvious way that to me seems obvious in Western medicine that concussions most likely are just treated as something that's self-correcting and things will improve with some rest.
Well, and keep in mind, we're still sort of blooming out of the day and age. It was seems like it was really only yesterday when the phrase "you got your bell rung" from parents who had a child in football or sports, that it was you stand up, you brush it off, you get back in the game if you can. Now we've understood to a greater extent, but there still is, I absolutely agree with you, there's lacking in community support. And I would go so far as to say there's a stigma around it. And here's the example I would give. If you see somebody in a grocery store on a scooter with one leg and a Vietnam veteran's hat, I don't know how you would respond to that, but if I see him going, I'll stop him and thank him for his service. I may ask him, hey, if you need anything from that top shelf, let me get that for you,
Yeah,
brother.
yeah,
But if you see someone just staring blankly at, the Cheerios in the cereal aisle, like without blinking for 3 minutes, one might assume they're crazy. One might assume, they haven't taken their psychiatric medication, so on and so forth. And so there's a bit of a stigma because unless you literally have, a scar tissue parting your
yeah,
hairline or it's something, it's a very visual cue to everybody
yeah,
else. Nobody really picks up on your history or what's happened to you. And so
yeah,
people, there have been a couple cases this year where I was helping people get through their treatment plan. And at the end of the treatment plan, they were looking for meaningful work. And it's, do you disclose the injury? In which case, the
mhm,
best they're going to let you do is bag groceries. Or do you not disclose the injury and start running into that sort of stigma of like, and this happened to this one person over and over again. He couldn't keep up on the sandwich line. He stared off to space in the pop-up booth he was using to sell Verizon phones. And it was hard. I really wanted to strengthen his spirit. It felt like for him to keep getting fired over and over and over from these jobs was really, it was hurting his soul. It was hurting him as a human being. And I didn't want to subject him to that, but it was looking for that even ground. You can't make the world understand what somebody's been through, and also give them a fair shot with whatever their limitations are to be in the workforce and grow towards their best and highest self. So yeah, it's a big process and it's a long process for many. And I would say, unfortunately, due to the limitations and the misunderstanding fundamentally of integrated medicine in the scope of what Western medicine, I mean, we live and breathe in an organized system of managed care, which is to say, generally speaking, you get 15 minutes in front of your primary medical director, not a penny more, and he's got a prescription pad in his pocket. And if what you're telling him doesn't fit that prescription pad, you may get a referral to a neurologist. You may get told it's all in your head, or we just don't understand. And you just kind of get brushed off. At minute 14, they've got the next patient to focus on. And there's a lack of coming to the table to understand what this person's been through. What are the social factors, the biological factors? How is this, perhaps this injury? I've gotten a lot of calls where it's shocking the amount of TBI that begins to present as psychosis, that begins to present as a fixation, like an OCD type of thing. It can get complicated fast.
Yeah, I actually would argue with you on, is it really 15 minutes?
Right.
Because I
Well,
just want to
that's
say,
being generous, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah. The other thing too is that, like, in you describing that moment of care from the primary physician, I'm on the page that most physicians don't develop a very deep connection with their client, even if they're kind of with them over, years or even decades. Oftentimes circumstances of injuries is not probably revisited. So what I see with the mediumship or the medical mediumship that I've done is that there is a very clear distinction between brain health and mental health. And oftentimes individuals who actually are suffering from brain health challenges, um, are labeled as just having mental health challenges, and the approach to healing is different. Is that what? How do you respond to that? Because I feel like there needs to be, of course, mental health support for this change in the actual brain, but I also feel that Western medicine is not actually addressing this particular need, because it's expensive to have doctors that are trained specifically in the health of the brain.
right. Well, let me
That's
see. That
yeah.
that's I almost need you to rephrase the
Yeah,
question.
so
That's what
what
I
I'm
would keep
saying
that.
is,
So,
one is I think most physicians are not trained on in-depth treatment programs for those that suffer from TBI or from concussions. I feel
right.
like that there is a there is either you're bleeding from a head injury and then getting given a connection to a neurologist, which then again ends up being very expensive because the cost of healthcare is also part of the reality of the treatment plan. Um, and that most times, if you are not directly dealing with, fragmented skull or blood that's coming from the head, that you won't actually be referred to that specialist.
That is absolutely true. And I'm going to take a minute to kind of give MDs a break. Keep in mind, these people have been in school for 8 years, and basically, you're trained to be a Swiss Army knife. You know a little
Yeah.
bit about vascular health, a little bit about gut health, probably a lot about cardio health. You know about fingernail beds and toenail beds, bacteria, virus, and you know a little bit about a whole lot. And then the only additional training that they're usually offered, it comes by the way of a CE or a CU, a pharmaceutical company that's come to sit in and, hey, let's talk about Vyvanse, how it can treat ADHD or whatever. So all their continued education is really through the pharmaceutical company, and it takes an extraordinary healer to make time and space to further, I guess, develop their skill set would be fair. And
Yeah.
the doctor I work under, he's a DO, which means he is a Western medically trained doctor. He's also an osteopath, which, for
Yeah.
the listener, if you don't know what that is, that's a chiropractor, and he understands integrative medicine very, very well. So,
Yeah, so I just want to say I am not trying to give physicians a challenge here because I understand their role when meeting a patient for the first time is to immediately assess whether this person needs to go to a hospital immediately or if they have the means to be able to provide care. So that's usually the first assessment step. And then the referrals are sent out to specific specialists, which can make an overall treatment plan complicated when you get multiple physicians involved in the diagnosing or in the treatment plan of individuals, particularly those with brain health challenges. Now, this is what I've seen intuitively, and this is why I love asking you because you act and work in the practical. I feel like you're somebody that, and like most physicians, through the course of the work that you do, develop an intuition to be able to help guide specific people. But I feel like
Yes.
holistic and integrative care is something that's not in the interest of most hospital administrations or clinic administrations, and it's certainly not in the interest of most insurance companies who very specifically bill in ways which is, I think, impacting the quality of care as well. Those are just sort of the reality of parameters of I think, Western medicine, and that's where I think someone like you is invaluable to help integrate many perspectives from from your physicians in order to provide the greatest care for the client that you're working with. And I'm just curious if you would talk a little bit more about your process of working with specific patients and those that suffer from traumatic brain injury. My whole goal with this podcast is for people to know that you exist and that there is a way for you to get support to anyone that has a brain injury and that has gone through the personality shift to be able to know that there is support out there.
And Kamela, thank you for that. So the way I'll tell you a story that tees up the work perfectly. I know a stunt man who actually, I believe he was on the television show The Mandalorian. I looked at his IMDb, I think it's called, and it's a
Yes.
pretty impressive
Yeah.
uh, uh, series of films and television that he's been involved in. But he was
Yeah.
involved in a stunt, and he had fallen from a very high scaffolding and hit his head on a piece of steel on the way down.
Yeah.
And so what happened is he found himself doing hyperbaric oxygen in a hospital near the film set, which is grade A medicine, and I would never say otherwise. However, after he was still wildly symptomatic in a number of ways after 2 weeks, and he panics, this isn't working, this isn't working. And so he read something about TMS, which is used in it's magnets, but it's called transcranial magnets, so on and so forth, which is basically drawing blood flow through magnetism and tapping and vibration into injured parts of the brain. And so he reads something about that, and next thing you know, he's packing up the Volvo and going to San Diego to try that, and with limited success. And so what happens oftentimes in these cases is there's nobody quarterbacking the play. Back to the doctor. I know a little bit about a whole lot. Am I a neurooptometrist? No, I am not, but I know what they do. Am I a neuro chiropractor? No, I'm not, but I know about Atlas C1 adjustments and what can happen if it's out of alignment. So sometimes you almost need a consultant to put together a collaborative treatment plan
Yeah.
of different providers, and then B, you need a coach, or I would better say an advocate, to help you navigate the ins and outs of that treatment plan. And when your life is sunk, you need a lot of attaboys, a lot of hand holding, a lot of you can do this, because it's a very isolated feeling to know you're not the same as you used to be, the feeling of fundamental misunderstanding everywhere you go. So what I really do, most of the, and I say families, I'm not even saying patients, most of the families I've gotten involved in have been through the ringer. The parents as
Yeah.
caretakers have sacrificed everything,
Hmm.
and the loved one's life has completely fallen apart. And sometimes years after, nobody can understand why they're still symptomatic. And basically, if you know what the brain does, back to your point, I don't look at this as mental illness. I look at this as a soft tissue injury that's
Yes.
responsible for executive functioning.
Yes.
So the symptoms will always tell you what the brain's asking for, what it needs.
Mm,
And if you know a little bit about a whole lot, you can put together an effective treatment plan. I really believe in getting involved in people's lives. And I think the magic bullet is going to sound so simple when I say it, but when I say TMS, hyperbaric oxygen, neurofeedback, glutathione. Of course, you want your three pillars of diet, sleep, and nutrition are essential to anything. But all those things are just the window dressing. People need to feel loved, they need
mm,
to feel heard, and they
mm.
need to feel understood in a way that brings their fire back as a human being. I mean, somewhere in one of those podcasts, we 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 get in these low vibrational thoughts in this state of hopelessness, and we forget, and there's documented stories that people have cured cancer by the power of imagination and
Yeah.
food. We forget
Yeah.
just what it means to be a human being, and we kind of lose our own fire in the process to recover. And so those are the types of cases and families I like to get involved in. I will say with some there's a tipping point in TBI when you're probably never really gonna be restored to the person you were. I've taken a couple of calls in the last year or two of somebody that caught a stray bullet, through the
Yeah.
skull, and it had removed some gray matter. And there's most definitely a tipping point where you can mitigate it, but it is what it is. But there's a threshold far below that where, I think of an injured brain as a brain that's stuck frozen in time, much like a laptop that's just waiting for the right prompts to begin to recover. Because if you think about a cell in the whole human body, a cell inside it has a mitochondria,
Yeah.
and a mitochondria only has two purposes: to grow or to heal. And
Yeah.
so it's just waiting, excuse me, for the right prompts. And is that, you know what? I don't want to you have a very broadband listenership, and I think going down a very technical path would probably.
Yeah. We're gonna glaze. We'll be like, what are
So I'm
you
going to
talking
kind of
about?
pull back. I'm going to kind of pull back from that.
I
But
mean,
but
yeah,
yeah,
like I agree with you. So like one of the things, the questions that's like popping up to me is let's say I'm a family member. Okay, wait, let me share a specific incident. I was at a friend's house and I, I just decided to like, hey, look at this photo album. When's the last time I saw a photo album? So I pull this photo album up and I set it down and I start going through all the pictures. And I'm like, wow, it's so great to see printed photos. Like, when's the last time you've had a moment to look through photo albums in 2025? And we get to this one picture and she goes, well, this is a sad story. This is this particular person and her husband and their beautiful children, and he out of the blue unalived himself. And I use that term because in case I clip this for TikTok or for algorithms of social media, unaliving is the word that we would use because I can't use other language or it'll be censored. So I guess it seems pretty clear. Have you heard that term before, unalived?
no, but it was that you said it early on in the show,
Okay.
and it landed on my heart. It's a powerful term.
It
Glad you would
is.
speak to
Yeah,
it.
I like it better than, like, maybe it's also something beautiful as well, like, in terms of, like, there's not as much, like, shame with that word, yeah,
Right.
which I think I is the tragic aftermath when someone who has an injury but let me finish this story. So, I obviously start doing my thing. I look at his energy, and I'm like, uh I feel him coming through in mediumship, and I said, "Did he have a traumatic did he have a brain injury? Because what he's showing me is that there was brain health, there was damage to his head." And she goes, "Oh my god, that's crazy that you mention it." He actually had driven off a cliff in a car in Palos Verdes, California, which are very high cliffs, and he not only lived, but was able to help pull out the other people in the car and bring them to safety. It was a real hero's experience. But then it was just a few years after that that his personality changed, they became depressed, and that eventually led to him taking his own life. And what he kept saying to me was that this was a brain injury. This was not mental health. This was things that had been shifted and that he never was accurately diagnosed with having traumatic brain injury. And that for him, having lived in this strange place of not having medical support, being told that like, oh, you're fine. There's nothing in like a CT scan. There isn't anything here. This is just, oh, maybe you're stressed out from working your job. He very systematically set up a plan to take care of his wife, his children, and then tragically unalived himself. And when I hear stories like that, and then I have to see how children and wives, family members are just deeply impacted by this sudden, which seems out of the blue, issue. There is a lot of shame and guilt that people have to live with when instead of like saying in this circumstance that dad actually unalived himself because of mental health, what if it was actually with greater clarity brought forth that he was suffering from a brain health issue and that the stigma of mental health is removed from the processing of grief. I mean, grief is already challenging enough to deal with, if that makes sense. So
It
then,
does.
yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah. So,
does.
so then where this takes me is like wanting to ask you if you are a family member who happens to be listening to this podcast, which I deal with a lot of people who have either dealt with this in the past or are dealing with it right now, what are some like critical signs that people should look for? I mean, obviously an injury, I guess, would be the most obvious thing, but what else would you do to suggest reaching out to somebody like you?
Um, I would say, and even 9 months removed from somebody can get up and walk away from a car accident and get a clean bill of health, and your
Yeah.
personality can change 9 months later. This is where it gets tricky, and some people may not have noticed. And then you might look for outbursts and anger. You might
Mm,
look for
yes.
shifts, subtle or major shifts in personality. I know for me, the big three, I had trouble conceptualizing things. My memory into this day is still poor, and that would be being generous with myself. I do a lot of protocols every day. My mother had Alzheimer's, her mother had Alzheimer's. So the fact that I'm TBI compounds my risk exponentially of not only getting it, but getting it early at like that's well, anyway, that's not a good way to go out by getting Alzheimer's at 55 or 65.
Yeah.
So, having said that, brain fog would be a big one.
Mm,
Memory loss, trouble conceptualizing things, shifts in personality, anger outbursts would be a big one.
hmm.
Sometimes I will say, in my case, there was an ocular motor issue, and I'm talking about the eyes, where my eyes would
Uh,
kind of dart around and sometimes still do to this day.
yeah.
I was actually told in therapy when I was young, every time I looked somebody in the eye too long, I would feel this spiral headache in the center of my forehead.
Hmm.
And I had been told on the dating scene with girls, like, why can't you look me in the face when you're talking to me? I was told that by a therapist who said, I think you're pathologically dishonest. And here I am, this person with a concussion and an ocular motor
Oh my
industry.
God.
Great, now you're calling me a sociopath. And what
That's
come to find
terrible.
out what it wasn't staring them in the eyes that was giving me a spiral headache. It was staring at anything at any
Ah,
fixed point for a
yeah.
series of time that was giving me a headache. And when you learn, it's almost like training a dog. When you learn something gives you discomfort after a while, you don't even try it. So my eyes are looking around and
Hmm.
back to the stigma. I'm around people that don't, and why would they understand that? There was no, data or research
Yeah.
or anything like that on the time. And so when a neurooptometrist from Vancouver, British
Mm,
Columbia,
yes.
told me that, and this is recent history, this is 3 years ago, I felt so validated to have
Yeah.
someone tell me after 50 years, you're not crazy. and
Yeah.
nothing's wrong. Well, not nothing's wrong with you. Something's wrong with you, but it's not what you've been told it was. You've
Yeah.
been mislabeled. So there's in our Western mindset, and this is usually only employed after serious, like through the windshield of a car, motorcycle accident, what you get is you get a lot of Western medicine, OT and PT. There's balance and dizziness. I'm trained in that.
Mhm.
There's learn how to finger paint, learn how to cook. Certainly mobility, like we're experts in that. Speech pathology, we're experts in that. But that's where the buck stops when you start talking about root cause. And by
Yeah.
that, I mean neuroinflammation, I mean broken axons and dendrites in your neural network. That's where we run into the limitation. And that's where my work really picks up. Okay, it's 6 months or 9 months later, and I
Yeah.
understand you're still feeling very, very poorly.
Mhm.
How can we get a working scan on what's going on with you? And I'm not a big fMRI has its place, SPECT has its place. I like QEG, which is just it's non-invasive and it's measuring the electrical currents of the brain because sometimes again, I don't want to get too sciencey, but there's something in the body called the vagus nerve. It's a huge roping cord of nerve. It goes from your inner thighs up around your rib cage, up the sides of your neck. It kind of lands behind your ears before going inward. That nerve's purpose is sympathetic, parasympathetic, fight or flight. Like it gets your body activated when you sense danger and it cools down when the danger is gone. Having said that, sometimes a brain injury will heat that nerve up and you can be
Mm.
running hot for decades. I got to tell you, through some of the treatment I've had really in the last past year, I've come
Yeah.
to understand that I was in a state of tension, of non anxiety induced tension in my body for
Oh,
40 years.
wow. That's I just want to say like I have a couple things. One, I think self-isolation is something that families should also look for, like individuals
Right.
that withdraw and become self-isolated. At least in most of the people I've done mediumship with, I see that there's this inability to communicate and share exactly what they're going through. So I just wanted to add that self-isolation. Do you agree with that? Like, I mean, I'm a medical medium here, but I'm curious what you would say. Do you ever see that there's reluctance to share exactly what they're going through because it's frightening?
Well, I would say that any mental health crises in general is usually going to be compounded by isolation. I can think of notable exceptions. I was on an intervention a few years ago. Goldman Sachs guy, probably can't say anything more than about that.
Yeah.
But this guy would rent out a whole nightclub in Vegas and all the women that came with it. And he was texting pictures of his adventures to his friends' wives and their families. So he was extra, the locus
Oh,
of
the
his
opposite.
mania was
Oh,
very external. But for the
uh,
most part, people become shut ins, and that's true of TBI and hygiene. It's very much something to look for. Fatigue would be a big one, which kind of goes
mm,
hand in hand with isolation. Can't seem to get out of the bed. I would say depression asterisk non-organic. I believe we talked about this on the phone.
yeah,
I'm gonna make a number up as I often do.
yeah.
Every 100 patients that go to a psychiatrist to get put on an antidepressant, I wonder how many of them actually talked through their current circumstance. Like, is it possible for some people that they wanted to be a park ranger, but instead they're stuck in a cubicle on a bank?
Yeah.
And at the level of soul, they're not who they wanted to be. They lacked the courage to step out there and
Yeah.
try and get where they wanted to be. And or they're going through a transpersonal crisis, divorce, kids in trouble. And yet we're going to a chemical relief without understanding maybe this isn't an antidepressant. Maybe this is a therapist. Maybe this is a life coach. I would say probably 10 to 15% of those cases, the pharmacological remedy is absolutely appropriate. And I would never say otherwise. But sometimes I think we fail to understand, to ask enough questions of how did you get here? Where was it that you hope to be? And what invigorates you in your life that you're not getting? And people in cases like this, people spiral. And sometimes a lot of the cases I get, when you go to the Staples or Office Max,
Yeah.
they sell those balls of rubber bands. Sometimes it's like a big ball of yarn you got to
Yeah.
slowly twine, and you got to start seeing every symptom for its own merit,
Yeah.
putting in different interventions. Some will be
Yeah.
diet, rest, and nutrition. Some will be taking a risk, and then some will be very, academic and technology based to give this person the best shot at a full and vibrant recovery, which I like to believe is absolutely possible for most of us. Again, I suffer from memory loss, but as someone who had a catastrophic brain injury well, for 20 years, it ruined my life. I have a full and abundant life. I'm married. I own a home, own a business. I'm a
Yeah.
published author. I've traveled
Yeah.
4 continents, so
Right
on and so
on.
forth. Right. So
Yeah, I absolutely love that you are also talking about the way that you can put protocols in place to support positive growth in your life, which is oftentimes not part of the belief process when someone is suffering from this and not that's not even aware that there are support systems and that there are supportive coaches like you to help manage and learn how to set up those protocols and then manage it long term. I think that's like exemplary that you're doing that. I also want to say I love the fact that you touched on the vagus nerve. And I feel like the world goes through trends with body parts.
right, right.
And, before the vagus nerve, which is sort of a bit on fire right now, we were really dealing with the gut brain connection and how like healthy health really starts in the gut and how that impacts the brain. Is that something that comes up as well when you're working with individuals? Do you feel that, I mean, obviously eating ultra processed food is not the path to having the best functioning mind, but I'm just curious, do you touch on that as well?
It is, and I do. So I went through an institute for integrative nutrition. It was a year of my life, but it was a year well spent. But the truth is, if you're eating frozen Totino's pizza rolls and drinking very little water and a 2 liter of Coke every day,
Yeah.
you almost don't have a fighting chance to come out of that. So there's a guy named Chris Palmer, Harvard trained psychiatrist, who somehow has found out that and I don't mean grocery store ketosis like keto cookie dough, yay. This guy of using real like a very strict regimen of ketosis, and by that I mean 30 net carbs or less per day, has used it effectively to treat schizophrenia. Now I will say the application of that, I have no. How do you get a schizophrenic not to eat a donut for 6 months? I don't know. I don't know, but he has done it effectively. And so I do. You got to kind of start sometimes with the staples of diet, rest, and nutrition. Again, one of the benefits of having an advocate involved in the family's life is sometimes mom and dad, while they're the closest to the situation, they're the least equipped to create accountability around that because they're mom and dad. And
Yeah.
I say this in my drug and alcohol intervention life. A mother's role is to be a mother, a father's role is to be a father. Certainly after an accident, they have to be a caretaker. But when we start turning into probation officer, nutritionist, personal banker,
Yeah.
psychiatrist, and all that, the water gets pretty muddy, and sometimes you're going to get a lot of pushback like you would with a 15-year-old teenager. Mom, stop telling me what to do.
Yeah.
And these interventions that have value and probably have a lot of merit to them suddenly aren't landing on their loved one because the delivery system, it sounds like a lecture coming from parents, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of nutritional psychiatrists that are based out of Harvard that are bringing a lot of great approaches to shifting the brain. Whether an individual is dealing with depression, anxiety, ADHD, OCD, there are specific nutritional menus that they put together to find a natural way to heal the brain. I've personally think that SSRIs are often administered very quickly to individuals, and I think it's enticing the idea that there's just this magic bullet that you can take to solve all of your life problems, but we are an integrated, fully embodied soul. We are here to fully embody and experience everything at once, which gets very complicated. And I think that there needs to be a lot of spiritual internal work that comes with living the best health, the best way possible. So when it comes to talking about like keto, under what I understand from a woman who is a specialist for women, her name is Stacy Sims. She actually says that keto is not healthy for women, period. And that she learned because she's based out of Stanford that most of the clinical data that's out right now is actually for men and is not for women. Women were always considered just miniature versions of men. So I'm very happy to see how women's health is making some progressive steps. But I also think that when it comes to understanding how to heal different aspects of the body, that there are many different approaches that one can do. So going back to like somebody that's schizophrenic, I really love how internal family systems is a process that's helped a lot of people heal from that level of psychosis. It's not, it might not work for everybody. And that's where I just want to also be the voice of like learning to listen to your intuition and be part of that advocacy for what you intuitively know is right for you, particularly for um, individuals that are suffering this. But I think it's also important for the caretaker who has all of these different roles to take care of for their loved one, that they also receive support. So I think that's a really interesting point that you made is the exhaustion that somebody deals with someone that has TBI and doesn't understand like long-term care and how to find relief for themselves as well. So do you coach people that are family members of those?
I I do. I I get involved in people's lives. I'll work with the parents once every couple weeks.
Sure.
There's some overlap between the word enabling or codependency in the world of addiction
Yeah.
and caretaking, and it's a fine and moving line. I would suggest anytime you're doing something for someone that they could probably do for themselves, you may, in a sense, especially over a long time, be encroaching on their path to independence. And
Mhm.
this that would be a whole nother hour. There's no playbook. Everybody's kind of operating from their DNA code in a system of love of like, how can I help you? How can I help you? We see it in addiction a lot. Sometimes not only is the help less than helpful, but it ends up creating a further path for the illness to progress. You said
Yes.
something. I want to give you a little theory I floated years ago. I was studying
Ooh,
the
yeah.
brain and found out,
Sorry,
and
you were
this
studying with who?
I was just studying the brain, just
Oh,
late
it's
night.
got you. Okay. Yeah.
So as it turns out, men, in terms of biology, are mostly gray matter, um, brain, mostly gray matter with a little bit of white matter. But women have a high degree of white, a ton more white matter biologically than men do. And listen, this is just a theory. You can't prove it,
Wait,
but you
what
can.
does it mean? What does that mean, the difference between white and gray?
That's what I'm getting at.
Oh,
So
sorry.
that so biologically, we don't really know. We just know
Uh,
something is far more present in women than men.
uh,
So I was watching a hockey game. I'll try and speed this story up.
oh, it's okay.
This got picked up in the Northwestern market, and then the New York Times ran with it.
Yeah.
So there was a girl, first year med student, standing behind the glass at a hockey game in the National Hockey League. And she starts tapping on the glass, and the coaching staff, I mean, again, it's hockey, it's chaos. They turn around and give her a glare like, stop tapping, stop talking to me. And she finally holds up her phone. She had written a message to the trainer, and she says, you have a cancerous mole on your neck. So
Oh,
as
wow.
the story goes,
Yeah.
they go back to their executive team meeting, And he's like, yeah, the craziest thing happened last night. But he tells the team trainer and the doctor, hey, this woman gave me this weird note. And the trainer, the doctor, team doctor's like, you do have a mole. Let's do a biopsy. It turns out it was cancer. Now, A, how did she know that? And B, notice that it wasn't a man that did it. So I'm a believer, I can't prove this,
Yeah.
that going back millions of years, women developed an intuitive radar. This is before the little baby carriages with the bumper on it and the door and the thing to put at the back door so they can't go outside. Millions of years ago, women developed this radar like dish. Where are my children? Where's the snake? Where's the wolf? And it was a survival of the species stuff. And
Yeah.
they still, women are, I think, more intelligent and highly more intuitively dialed in than men. And you are the most perfect example of that. You have a gift.
Well, I'll say thank you to that all day.
Yeah. So,
But I also have like deep love and adoration for all types of individuals. And I think that it's interesting because gender is such a hot topic right now. I also see in the future it won't be as much of a hot topic, that people will be at peace with what will be,
right.
which is great for those people. But it's just to shift into and sorry, it's very interesting, the way that, healthcare is evolving, and I think it's gonna be interesting to see what happens when AGI, or AI hits the medical system in a way to support more personalized individual pathways of healing. I'm excited about that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of liability legal issues so that it won't flow. I don't feel like it's going to be unleashed to the general population like anytime soon when it comes to like seeing our doctors or going to physicians. Maybe in 3 years we'll start to see some kind of integration. But yeah.
Well, I can tell you, and little plug, maybe look for it in 6 months on Google. My wife and I and are starting an integrative medicine, a small hospital program
Ooh.
for people with low acuity substance abuse, mid, medium acuity brain injury, and and it's more expansive whether it's a long COVID or something like that. But ABI, TBI, place where they'll be surrounded by love, which I indicated earlier, but surrounded by the best data-driven technology to give them their best chance at getting their life back on track. And so I'm hoping that will be my legacy and my fingerprints. It's the working name we have right now is Free Dive Institute, which has nothing to do with scuba diving, but it has everything to do with, well, we're working with an advertising agency and a brander, and that's what we all kind of came down to. I hope it'll stick.
See,
And
this
you
is
know what?
what I just want to say, just hearing that, I get really excited. I love this is what I want to see people like you doing is starting these facilities that are outside the traditional structure of
Right.
Western medicine. I think that you integrate the best aspects of Western medicine. I'm not here to say that you're denying clinical data that's been brought forth, but I think that you will bring an entirely new awareness to the field that you're specifically focused on.
Yeah, and there's um, the the clinical is deeply empowering modalities. The integrative medicine is really is it's mitochondria based mental health with a number of specific focuses to it. And then the rest is love and support and working from a place of understanding your patient's story, understanding your patient's needs, and checking all the boxes to give them their best shot at recovery. Honestly, in 22 years of working in treatment in various form, I would say as much of that pro forma and proof of concept came from what I haven't seen work, and
Mm,
then pulling the best of the best from what I have seen work. And in the meantime, if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can find me at tbicoaches, plural.com.
yeah.
I have a podcast called Living with Traumatic Brain Injury with Jeff Gould. I
Yes.
have a book I wrote called A Life Concussed. It's on Amazon, and I'm told it reads really fast, like you can't put it down, but
Good.
it's kind of soul crushing. I had a really hard time getting sober. I had a really hard time
It's
being a human.
interesting. You know what? I am so glad that we brought that up. There were 2 things that I just wanted to mention before I let you leave. One is that we've talked about a lot of traumatic brain injury, like falling downstairs or falling off a ladder or a car crash. I also would just like to bring attention to those who've suffered from domestic violence. That is something that is very unspoken about when it comes to, I feel, TBI. And I say maybe not so much in the medical field, but just in terms of victims of domestic violence who, let's say, are struck really hard and don't receive any medical attention. I think those injuries are very valid and part of this conversation.
Absolutely. Not only that, there's some data coming out that supports the idea. So when you say CTE, and now we're talking National Football League stuff,
Hmm.
generally that's where that value is assigned. And keep in mind, this isn't in my brain. I don't see this as a brain injury singular. I see it as a condition. Think of it as a
Mm.
distant cousin of Parkinson's and a distant cousin of Alzheimer's. That's the result of many subconcussive blows. And it seems like from everything
Mhm.
I've read, the second biggest control group where we're seeing those people symptomatically would be wives of abusive partners.
Yeah, I know, and it's, something that I like to just I want whoever's listening to this, to know that you're not alone and that I'm here to advocate for those that are silenced to speak their truth and obviously to find ways to, um, to be empowered. And that brings me to the second part, which is addiction. I feel like we haven't really spoken about that journey that you went through and how you became an addiction um, like counselor, but a lot of times there's co-occurrence between an injury and self-medicating through substances or alcohol. And as we understand quite even more so today than ever, that drinking regular, like, or consuming alcohol is not healthy for the brain. This just causes more trouble for the individual. And I also just want to add that I love the fact that when you talk about creating your facility or your clinic, that you are starting with the individual's story so that you understand what they've been moving through in their life that brought them to meet you for that first time. I feel like that is something that the physician doesn't do. The physician doesn't have time to hear your story in this set of circumstances. So that's just such a compassionate approach to healthcare. I just am wanting to really highlight and emphasize that. Like, it just huge kudos to you and your wife. I'm very excited. Can you just, and I don't want to take up all your day, but um, are there any like words of encouragement for those that have a traumatic brain injury or that have had multiple or some singular event that has impacted the head and addiction?
Oh,
Yeah, it's a big
well,
one.
it's hard to give. You can't give someone a bite size, I don't know, like a philosophical platitude, if you will, that's going to change anything. But I'll tell you what I've come to understand,
Mm,
that everything in my life absolutely happened for a reason. And in the way I view life from
mhm,
the standpoint of soul,
mm.
my best and highest good and my medicine for the world came directly from what I had to go through to get it. So for me, everything I'm talking about is very experiential
Yes.
and far less academic. And so it seems some people's soul chooses a very hard path and a very hard obstacle through this life. And I've seen things that are just so tragic and unfathomable and unbelievable. But to the person, I guess I would say something simple and maybe party line, but just don't lose hope. As long as you're drawing a breath, there's a chance. And sometimes people and things will come into your life if you're awake to them that offer you a fork in the road. You know, human beings have free will, right? And we can always choose to stay stuck, certainly, or but there's also a choice to begin to follow sometimes the breadcrumb trail to get unstuck. And there's a Chinese proverb that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I will tell you, 22 years ago, it took me an awful lot of help to get sober. And this was at the state-sponsored free bed level. I had been homeless for a
Yeah.
year and going through all the things those sorts of people go through. But that help was available to me, and I believe it's available to anyone who makes a conscious choice in their heart that I can and will get well, and I will get through this. Yeah, so, and that's a really good question. So,
Yeah, I mean, to go from homeless to building wellness clinics is really the hero's journey that I'm hearing and that I'm witnessing, just like in this conversation with you. I could easily talk to you for hours, but I won't rob you of the good work that you have to keep doing today. How can you remind people how to find you, how to connect with you? And are you on social media?
I am. If you Google Jeff Gould traumatic brain injury, it will populate pretty quick. But I would say for substance abuse issues, my website is laborofloveintervention.com. For traumatic brain injury, it's tbicoaches.com. But you may notice pretty quickly that they share the same phone number and they read my cell phone. So there's that. You know, it's not like I
Yes.
have a secretary working for me these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm usually good for anywhere from 15 minutes to a 30-minute proverbial
Yeah.
cup of coffee on the phone, basically.
Yeah.
And if there's something I can do to help, either to point someone in the right direction, I would also like you mentioned a lack of community resources for those
Yeah.
that use social media.
Yeah. Mm.
The CTE and TBI Warrior Circle. That's the name of the Facebook page. My friend Rico Petrini runs it. He's brilliant. He does free Zooms and get-togethers and gatherings. There's a lot of good data there on how to heal and recover. And then lastly, if someone's needing integrative medicine sort of hospitalization and they may not have some of the finances for like an on-men clinic in Los Angeles, I work for Johnson Medical Associates here in Dallas. We bring in shepherded people from all over the planet. Their specialty is really black mold injuries on the brain, things like that. But we do hyperbaric oxygen, we do neurofeedback, we do brain scans, we do hormone replacement, we do all the things. And contrary to what we talked about, our medical community, I've seen Dr. Johnson spend on average about 2 hours and 15 minutes with
Mm.
every patient, just asking questions, asking about their social history, the buildings they lived, ordering blood work, really trying to untangle, microtoxins, gut health, gut nutrition. Look at, I'll use long COVID as an example. He
Mm.
said that, and it was so simple, and yet it felt like new information. He said, long COVID is not COVID. You haven't had the virus in your body for
Mm.
3 years. So, what you're looking at is a series of allergic reactions that have created some new conditioning metabolically. And that's a puzzle that needs to be understood and
Yeah.
untangled. It's not going to get better on its own. You have to
Yes.
take direct actions to help untangle that bad biology that's responding to an event that happened 3 years ago on a return to health. So that's kind of the nature of our work, of my work. I've done some podcasting. I've done a lot of traumatic brain injury interventions and ended up in people's homes as far away from Hawaii
Yeah.
and put together a treatment plan and got people the help.
God, my joy to connect with you. And I am so excited to share you on the podcast to help support family members and those that are directly impacted by this. So, thank you again for taking time to meet with me today. You're incredible, and I wish you absolutely all the best.
You are incredible as well, and thank you for having me as a guest. It's been a joy to be in this.
Absolutely. I'll see you soon.
All right, thank you.
Bye. Computer? Okay, we were getting ready to hang up, but we were having a quick conversation. So, this is a PS to the podcast. There was a moment where you met an individual who had, you said, the most incredible blue eyes. Will you share that with me?
Sure. So I had been in residential treatment. I think it would have been about 1998, which would have made me 26 years old. And at the time, I had some trouble with the law, and they said you can go to prison for 3 years, you can go to residential treatment for a year. So, I can do math. So I ended up in residential treatment, and somewhere in that stay, there was a medium, I would say. She was a woman of color. She had these powerful blue eyes. And one day she said, "Hold out your palm." And I did. And it was her. She was the first person that told me you had a traumatic brain injury around the age of 12 or 13, and it fundamentally changed who you were as a human being. So that was the first time I had ever considered, because again, my symptoms and my incident, there was a disconnect to where I never kind of put those pieces of my own puzzle together. So that had been in the back of my mind. And then she gave me the bad news. I said, so I'm going to get sober right now, right? Like my life's going to get better from here. And she's like, actually, no, it's going to get a whole lot worse for about the next 4 years. But you are going to be released from your suffering in a very dynamic way, and you're going to be a totally different human being. And so keep in mind, I'm 26, and at the time I had suffered so greatly, it was hard to picture 4 more years of a greater suffering. This is pretty well documented in the book. Trust if suffering were a meal at a buffet, like at the the Kenny Rogers chicken fried steak place, like I have
Yeah.
way too much of it on my plate. Anyway, so that was the first time I was exposed to the information, and I was given a complimentary brain scan 20 years after that that
Wow.
confirmed it in spades. Your traumatic brain injury all day long, and somehow that was news to me. I knew I had PTSD. I knew I had
Mhm.
addiction,
Mhm.
and some attachment theory issues through counseling, but I didn't know that really put together the rest of the puzzle. Like I said, sometimes it's a big ball of yarn that you slowly unwind it. And most of my path of healing has largely been one of self advocacy and self
Yeah.
discovery, I would say, although
Yeah.
it's taken a community and help support. So thank you for getting us
I
back
have
on.
I have one more question though, because I liked how you said, of course, we have free will, and there's some very famous philosophers like Sam Harris who are alive today and saying that free will is an illusion and it doesn't exist. I'm curious, do you think we have that much free will based on a palm reader who actually clearly told you that you would be suffering even more?
Oh,
That's a heavy question. To put you on the spot.
so the the answer I think is both. I
Yeah.
think to a degree, I have a friend who's a Taoist in North Carolina, and he says he believed that life is set up like a GPS. You can get off track, but the track is mostly self-correcting, and we mostly end up where we
Mm,
want to go,
mm,
which to your point, to Sam Harris's point, we don't. But I think in the context, we always have, in the context of a path that's probably headed somewhere. And sure, we're shaped by the culture we come from politically. We're shaped by the interests, by what we're shown, and things like that. But I think in the context of a path that is our life, there's plenty of room to make decisions and mistakes. One of the things I started measuring years ago, I would look every time I made a mistake, was there that quiet, still voice as I'm standing on a bucket with a razor sharp kitchen knife doing overhead household repairs? Was there a moment where it's like, hey, you're about to cut half your finger off? And I found universally there always was. There was that small, still voice like, hey, don't do that,
yeah, yeah,
And
this
then the
isn't
times
bad.
when the voice wasn't there, I understood that mistake to be clearly as being part of my path. Oh, that mistake was actually supposed to happen. Maybe
Yes.
both were supposed to happen to get me where I needed to go. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's how the GPS recorrects you. I love it. Thank you so much. I had to record that because this story was amazing. Thanks
absolutely.
again, Jeff. You have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kamela.